How are you guys? Don't forget to leave a review and enjoy the story. Enjoy watching. The story begins. The sky is painted in warm shades of pink and orange. The spire of the church rises above the rooftops, its silhouette clearly visible against the backdrop of the sunset. Inside the hall, flooded with the warm rays of the setting sun, a group of people in austere robes have gathered. Two guards stand on either side of Kiska. He is kneeling, his hands tightly bound with rope behind his back. Opposite them, in the center of the hall, stands the high priest, announcing the verdict. The bound young man with ash-colored hair, named Kiska, was found guilty. His face, covered with abrasions and bruises, expressed deep despair. His eyes were wide open in horror, his pupils constricted, and his mouth slightly open in a silent scream. In conclusion, the high priest announced that the accused would be thrown into the Katarov dungeon. MC, trembling with despair, tried to protest that it was all slander and that he had done nothing wrong. But the priest did not listen to his words, making it clear that no one was going to listen to him. The old man held out his hand, ordering the guards to take the guilty man away from the hall. Three men standing aside watched with sly, satisfied smiles as Kiska screamed that he had been framed. The guards restrained Kiska as he continued to shout, trying to get attention and explain himself. No one listened to him, and in the end, he only managed to shout curses at everyone present. MC was born and raised in the village of Katarov. It is a quiet and peaceful place with beautiful, neat houses, where every resident has their own busy life. This village has an S-rank dungeon called the Katarov Dungeon. Many adventurers try to conquer this dungeon, which is why it is so lively around it. Kiska himself works as a farmer. He sits on a low fence in a relaxed pose. With a dazed look and his mouth slightly open, he surveys the field in front of him. Almost all of the tomatoes have been destroyed, their stems and leaves withered, as if the plants had been poisoned or trampled by a crowd. After examining the garden again, MC bitterly concluded that his entire crop was ruined. Suddenly, someone rudely called out to him, emphasizing his silver hair. It was a group of three people, two unpleasant-looking guys, and in front of them a muscular man with an even more unpleasant appearance named Darga, the son of the village chief. He had a rough face, his hair was shaved on the sides, and the rest was gathered in a ponytail at the back of his head. He wore a pair of earrings in each ear and a large chain around his thick neck. Darga approached Kiska and, with a comical expression on his face, said that he had learned from his father that his harvest was completely ruined. Kiska raised his eyebrows and widened his eyes, preparing to argue. After all, he knew that it was Darga himself who had destroyed his garden, and his nasty grin now confirmed it completely. But he did not voice his knowledge aloud. He just lowered his head, acknowledging his latest defeat in front of this company, and said that there was nothing he could do about it. MC. Alks, so he had long been accustomed to this attitude toward himself. After all, in this country, people with silver hair like him are subjected to ridicule. Once upon a time, there were people who betrayed humanity and helped demons. They're called Alks. Darga grimaced as if something disgusting had been brought close to him. He was not satisfied with Kiska's answer, so he bluntly said that he didn't care about other people's apologies, then swung his fist wide. The heavy blow landed on Kiska's face, causing his head to jerk to the side and his body to fall to the ground right next to the tomatoes. Darga's accomplices joined the fight, and MC received another blow to the jaw. After that, it was impossible to tell who was hitting whom and where. Kiska could only cover his head with his hands and wait for the nightmare to end. He was constantly being beaten, and his crops were being destroyed, but he had no choice but to endure it. After a while, MC walked down the alley in proud solitude, trying to wipe the blood from his face with his hands. He was looking only at his feet, so he didn't immediately notice the girl on his way. She was standing, modestly hiding her hands behind her back. She was dressed in a simple dress, with open shoulders, and wore a kerchief on her head. Namia had straight bangs and shoulder-length hair. Two small hair clips adorned the left strand of hair near her face, and a cute pigtail was hidden behind her ear. At the sight of the battered Kiska, covered in bruises, she slightly furrowed her eyebrows and smiled modestly, expressing sympathy. Without words, she guessed that Darga had bullied him again. MC was surprised when he saw a familiar face and called out to the girl named Namia. She politely invited him to sit down so she could treat his wounds. They sat down on a stone bridge, where Namia treated the wounds on his face with sincere care. Namia was Kiska's neighbor and childhood friend. She was the only person in this village who was close to him. When she finished treating his wounds, she smiled kindly and told him that everything was ready, for which he thanked her. But then Namia became sad. She didn't understand why the villagers didn't like Kiska. Kiska couldn't answer that question. He just said with a humble look on his face that there was nothing he could do about it, because everyone hates people with silver hair. Namia thoughtfully hummed, pausing for a moment. Then, with a good-natured smile, she admitted that she actually liked the color of his hair. Then she closed her eyes and turned away, hiding her quiet laughter, while Kiska looked at her, shocked and confused by her confession. He looked into space in front of him, his eyebrows furrowed, and his lips curved into a silly, happy smile. He knew his hair brought misfortune, but the fact that Namia accepted him as he was warmed his soul. Namia continued to maintain a comfortable silence between them. She never turned to Kiska, but she still called him quietly, drawing his attention. Namia announced that she was going to marry Darga. Kiska's eyes widened, and his mouth opened in shock. Then he turned away. The news was so sudden, and it hurt him deeply, and he didn't know what to say, but he didn't want to show it and upset Namia. He decided to congratulate her out of politeness. Namia was surprised by his reaction. It wasn't the response she had expected. She glanced at Kiska in surprise, but then she immediately turned away and asked uncertainly if he was okay with it. Kiska asked again, not fully understanding her behavior. Namia then asked if he planned to live here in the future, and when he answered yes, she nervously tugged at the hem of her dress. She said she didn't think it was a good idea because everyone here made fun of him, and if he stayed, sooner or later he would break down. Kiska looked away uncertainly. He had nowhere else to go. This was the only place where he was allowed to stay. After a moment's hesitation, Namia grabbed Kiska's hand. She pulled it toward her, holding it with both hands, and turning her whole body toward Kiska, she suggested they run away together. Once again, the MC was shocked by the new statements. Namia continued to look at him with eyes full of hope and argued that she had some savings and that they would be enough to get them by for a while. Kiska asked if she was sure about her decision and received an affirmative answer. Namia turned away and frowned as she admitted that she did not want to marry someone like Darga. After these words, everything became much clearer to Kiska. He looked seriously at Namia and called her name so that she would look at him. Then he declared his love for her and pulled her into a sensual kiss, after which she reciprocated his feelings. As darkness fell, MC left his old house with a bag on his shoulder. As he closed the door behind him, the smile never left his face. That night, he and Namia were going to leave the village. Having finished with the door, Kiska broke into a run. He was excited by the idea that all this darkness would be left behind. The moonlight lit his way to Namia's house. Stopping near it, he raised his head and looked at the windows. Suddenly, a scream came from inside the house, and Kiska ran closer to it. At that moment, the scream was repeated, asking him to stop. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck MC's head when he realized it was Namia's voice. He threw his bag on the ground and rushed into the house. Running up the stairs to the second floor, he threw open the door, shouting the girl's name. A terrifying scene unfolded before him. Namia sat on the bed near the window, looking a little disheveled, her knees tucked up. She was surrounded by three familiar guys who seemed to be inseparable and did everything together. One guy and Darga sat on the bed in their underwear, pinning the victim between them. The third, who had not yet managed to take off his pants, hurriedly headed towards Kiska, who had so unexpectedly invaded foreign territory. Darga turned around and, seeing a familiar face, opened his mouth in shock, while Namia looked at the newcomer with high hopes of rescue. Kiska himself looked at her with equal surprise and disappointment, only managing to call her name uncertainly. Darga jumped up from his seat and demanded an answer as to why Kiska was there. Kiska could only stare back in bewilderment and ask what they were doing. Darga smirked, squinting one eye, implying that Kiska was completely blind and couldn't see the obvious. MC glanced at Namia. She looked devastated and was on the verge of tears, her cheeks red and the straps of her dress slipping off her shoulders. After regaining his composure and realizing the situation, Kiska looked back at Darga and ordered him to get out of there, to which he received a correspondingly rude and uncomprehending question. Then Kiska shouted at him furiously to get out of there and punch him in the face with all his might. Darga grimaced in pain, muttering about how Kiska dared to do such a thing, and, deciding not to remain in debt, he punched Kiska powerfully in the solar plexus. Then he swung his leg as Kiska clutched his stomach. A sharp knee flew at high speed straight into his eye. Behind Darga, his friend arrived in time. The three of them mercilessly kicked Kiska, who was sitting on the floor, while he covered his head with his hands. Namia couldn't take it anymore and started crying and screaming for help, begging someone to stop this madness. The men stopped kicking, and Darga decided to return to the question of what Kiska was doing there. He declared that Namia was his fiancée, and, without letting up on his threats, repeated his question. The MC froze in horror, not knowing what to do, because he couldn't tell the truth under any circumstances. But these men knew how to get an answer. They exchanged sly glances, understanding each other without words. Two assistants grabbed Kiska and dragged him to the wall. While one held him back, preventing him from falling forward, the other pressed Kiska's hand against the wall and squeezed it tightly. A maniacal smile appeared on Darga's face. He seemed to take real pleasure in causing people pain. He approached Kiska and, reaching for his clamped hand, grabbed the nail plate of his index finger. At that moment, the nail was torn off at the root, and electric shocks of pain shot through Kiska's mind, instantly bringing him to consciousness. Unable to bear the excruciating pain, he screamed at the top of his lungs. Namia, horrified by what she saw, covered her mouth with both hands. Darga continued his torture and tore off another nail on the middle finger. Ignoring the screams, he examined this piece of someone else's flesh as if it were some kind of decoration. Soon Namia couldn't take it anymore and ran up to Darga, begging him to stop. He turned around and looked at her with displeasure, but decided to listen. Namia wrapped one arm around herself and covered her mouth with the other in fear, promising to tell him the truth in exchange for him stopping the abuse of her friend. Kiska shouted loudly for Namia not to dare say anything, but he was immediately struck hard in the face. MC tried hard to keep his eyes open, looked at Namia, and repeated his request not to tell them anything as if in a delirium. Soon, he began to lose consciousness from the blows, but he could still vaguely see Namia telling her fiancé about their plan, while he grimaced more and more with every word. Tears streamed from his eyes, and he could only mentally call Namia's name, and she seemed to hear his thoughts and, through her own tears, looked into his eyes, calling out to him mentally in response. Meanwhile, Darga tightened his grip on her fragile neck. Finally, Namia smiled softly at Kiska, expressing her feelings without words. And that expression was the last thing Kiska saw before his eyes closed tightly as he lost consciousness. The view opens up to the village of Katarov, surrounded by a fortified wall with a watchtower. The calm blue sky with lush clouds seems to reflect nothing of the grim fate awaiting the MC. The panorama of the village, surrounded by greenery, reappears before our eyes. It seems as if the voice of the high priest echoes, calling Kiska a condemned man, reminding us that behind this tranquility lies tragedy. The court ruled that Kiska took advantage of Namia's parents' absence, broke into the house, raped and killed her. And for this, he will be thrown into the dungeon of Katarov. Escorted by 2 guards and led by the high priest, MC was brought to the gates of the dungeon. Kiska, shaken after the tragic incident, did not react to anything. He just stared down with a vacant look and sighed heavily. Only one thought was spinning in his head: Namia was dead. Upon learning the truth, Darga became enraged and killed her. And if you look at his face now, you will not see a trace of remorse or regret. And then everything was staged, as if it was MC who had committed the crime. The elderly priest offered Kiska the opportunity to say his last words before punishment. But he didn't say a word, continuing to stare at the floor with a tired gaze. Kiska remembers trying to explain everything to them, but it was useless, because the false testimony of 3 people, who were now watching him with smug smiles, as well as the authority of the village chief, reduced Kiska's words to nothing. Therefore, there was no point in him saying anything now. The old man accepted his silence. Raising his hand in front of him, he announced the beginning of the execution without any last words. He gave the order to the guards to cut the ropes. A subordinate approached Kiska and, with one sharp movement, cut the ropes on the stranger's hands, which snapped and flew off in different directions, revealing their bruised wrists. Darga, standing at the bottom of the steps, smiled pointedly and said that there was no point in this action because Kiska would die anyway. And the MC agreed with him, because whoever enters the teleport never returns. It could be called a death sentence. The silence was broken by the stern voice of the priest ordering them to proceed, and the guards loudly agreed. They simultaneously and synchronously pushed Kiska in the back. Taken by surprise in the brute force, he opened his eyes wide and let out a croaking sound, and his body staggered forward due to inertia. Now he was standing inside the magic circle. The floor beneath his feet lit up. MC watched in horror as rays of energy enveloped his body. The energy intensified, forming a whirlwind of light around him. Gritting his teeth, and through bitter tears he couldn't hold back, he mentally screamed how much he hated it all. Namia had been killed by her fiancé, and the village chief and ordinary villagers wouldn't even listen to him. Rage and hatred engulfed his soul with greater force. And in the abyss of these destructive feelings, he was finally sucked into the teleport. He lay sprawled face down on the floor. When he came to, he began to look around and opened his mouth in surprise. Before him was a long, seemingly endless corridor with columns. MC realized with dread that he was already in the S-rank dungeon. Or, in other words, this place could be called the Katarov Dungeon. Kiska had no choice but to move forward down this corridor, and so he did. After a while, he heard a loud roar. Kiska stared ahead with wide eyes, waiting for something to approach. At the end of the corridor, a large dark silhouette peered around the corner. Focusing his eyes, Kiska could make out dark fur. The huge monster began to turn toward him. It turned out to be an A-rank bugbear. The sight of it alone made his blood run cold. Powerful as a mountain of muscle, it was covered in thick fur that resembled armor. Its beastly face, with bared fangs and a malicious glare, showed only rage and hunger. His head was crowned with a heavy spiked helmet, and a massive metal shoulder pad rested on his shoulder, emphasizing his threatening size. His clawed paws seemed capable of tearing a man to pieces, and his foul breath betrayed his bloodthirsty nature. At first glance at the bugbear, Kiska felt his body freeze with paralyzing terror. The air seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. He realized that this was not just a beast, but the embodiment of death, and that there was virtually no chance of survival. Adventurers had told him about this monster, and that it was impossible to escape from it. The bugbear suddenly noticed the stranger's presence and turned its gaze on Kiska. It moved sharply toward him with a quick, swift step, and Kiska, frightened, hurried to move away from it. But the monster was fast, so Kiska instinctively waved his arm to cover himself and shouted. The bugbear swung at him with a fist twice the size of his head, with the obvious intention of destroying his enemy. Acting on adrenaline, MC was able to jump forward, covering his head with his hands, and the blow landed on the floor, turning the stone into dust. Kiska realized that this was a one-time stroke of luck, and that his end was near. In desperation, he closed his eyes and shouted for help with all his might, as if there was someone else here besides him and the monster. And apparently, someone really was there, because a blurry silhouette suddenly appeared in front of Kiska. A female voice asked if he wanted her to help him. Kiska stared at the shadow in bewilderment, not understanding what was happening. But he quickly made a decision and once again desperately shouted for help. The shadow turned into a beautiful girl with long dark hair, also dressed in knight's armor. She held out her hand to him and said with a cheerful smile that she would grant him skill. Light poured from her palm. Kiska's eyes widened in surprise. As if text appeared before his eyes, or a voice in his head announced that he had received a skill. Save and start over. The shadow evaporated into thin air, and Kiska cried out in shock. After all, the problem hadn't gone away, and he didn't know how to use this skill to defeat the bugbear. During his brief conversation with the girl, the monster had managed to get close to Kiska and was already raising its fist above his head. Kiska only had time to cover himself with his hands, hoping that he would get lucky and maybe the monster would miss. But no miracle happened, and the ferociously powerful blow hit him in the face, deforming it like soft plasticine. He flew backwards, leaving trails of blood behind him. His body spun in the air and landed face down on the stone floor. He was finished off with a single blow, and the monster, deciding that the job was done, turned and left. As if awakening from a heavy sleep, MC tore his head, which was now undamaged, away from the hard surface. When awareness came back to him, he opened his eyes wide and instantly got up on his hands. Sitting on his knees, he looked at his hands. Kiska was speechless with surprise because he had just been killed, but he was alive. Memories of how the monster had hit him replayed in his head. This did not match what was happening now because he was supposed to be dead. Kiska wondered why he felt alive in that case. Because of his thoughts and inner conflicts, Kiska did not notice the bugbear approaching him from behind. He immediately woke up when he felt a chill run down his spine from the stranger's presence. Kiska turned around and looked at the monster, exactly the same as in his memories. Kiska didn't have time to think about anything else, as a huge hairy fist flew into his face, deforming it beyond recognition. His body flew to the side as blood spurted from his mouth and nose. He was hit again and died again. A moment passed, and Kiska woke up in the same place, kneeling as before. He was surprised to find himself back to life again. He clearly remembered that the bugbear had just killed him. The monster reappeared behind him, and Kiska turned around. He was struck in exactly the same way, and he flew away like a dead carcass, wondering what was going on. Again, the same place, the same position, the same surprise, and the same unharmed body. He came back to life again. The same thoughts crossed his mind, that it was all strange because he had just been killed. Bugbear found himself back in the same place, and repeated his blow. When Kiska woke up, he felt an even greater fear grip his body. He couldn't believe he was alive again. But when he saw the monster towering over him, he realized that wasn't the case. He wasn't rising from the dead. MC covered his head with his hand in fear and looked at the monster, waiting for further action, which he already knew about. And he was right. He was struck with a swing, turning his face into mincemeat. But at that moment, Kiska realized that every time he died, he returned back to the moment before he died. Lying motionless, bleeding, he made a mental note that this was a skill that the girl had given him. The skill to save and start over. Bugbear left after completing his task. Kiska was overcome with despair at the realization that he would continue to die over and over again. A moment passed, and he woke up again as if from a nightmare. Only this time, Kiska already understood what it really was. He didn't want a repeat of that horrific scene, so he jumped to his feet in terror and rushed forward. But even when he tried to run away, the result was always the same. They catch up with him and kill him. Dodging to the side, jumping, nothing helped. It happened again and again, the moment repeating itself in different variations. He would not stop dying. Kiska is tired. He can't take it anymore. He wants someone to kill him for good. Once he dies, he would no longer feel this pain. Waking up once again, Kiska jumped up from the floor, suddenly realizing something. He had come up with an idea that he thought might work. He would be able to escape this hell if he stopped the skill. Kiska opened his status. A menu appeared in front of him in the form of a list of skills, but only the first line was filled with the skill he had been given. The question arose as to what he should do next and how he could stop it. After pressing with his finger, the screen lit up, and Kiska, his eyes wide with surprise, sank into prostration. When he touched the status window, memories flooded his mind. He remembered his girlfriend, how Namia smiled sweetly and happily at him. He remembered Darga, who had killed this girl. He remembered the villagers who had framed him. Kiska frowned and snarled in anger. Would his hatred disappear just like that? He categorically disagreed with that, but he also had no intention of dying again at the hands of the bugbear standing behind him. Therefore, fueled by his surging hatred and rage, Kiska jumped up from the floor and lunged at the monster with a cry. The fist that was supposed to hit his face whizzed over his head, and his body crashed into the beast's torso. Now the MC was suffocating with fear. He just moved forward without thinking, attacking the enemy without any plan. It was a pathetic attempt, but not entirely useless. The monster killed him again. But Kiska, lying in a pool of blood after the blow, smiled for the first time since entering the dungeon. He had managed to avoid the enemy's attack. MC doesn't know how many times he has died, probably more than 100. But now, with a fighting spirit and focus, he runs towards the enemy and analyzes the situation. The bugbear swings with his right hand, and Kiska crouches, dodging the attack. Then he swings his left arm, hoping to knock him down with this blow. But Kiska dodges to the right, then jumps behind him. He knows from experience that it is useless to try to run away immediately. It will be easier for the beast to kill him that way. So Kiska stays calm and waits for the attack. When it comes, he dodges to the right. This is the result of MC after 100 deaths. He punches the monster in the face and rejoices inwardly at his achievement. He managed to push it away. The blow is too weak, but now he can run. Kiska has 25 seconds. During this time, he needs to find a way to move forward. Various loot is hidden in the dungeon. Some of it could be useful, but Kiska saw only useless junk. Soon, a bugbear ran around the corner with a furious roar. Kiska turned around and cursed silently. He looked at the road ahead, realizing he hadn't been here before, and ran forward at full speed. But when his foot stepped on one of the tiles, the floor beneath his feet disappeared, and Kiska fell down with a scream. He fell into a trap with sharp spikes and died. After that, the MC continued to try about 200 times. He had fought this bugbear many times before, so his movements became even more precise. Now, by attacking the monster's eyes, he gains about 35 seconds to escape. But this is only the beginning, because a trap awaits him ahead. Kiska stopped in front of those very slabs, which, when pressed, caused the floor to collapse. Standing with his legs wide apart, he counted the splits, mentally drawing a line to which he could move. The bugbear had already caught up with him and was close. Kiska gathered his courage and made sure he was ready. Then he stepped on the tile and jumped into the hole that opened up. Gritting his teeth, he marked his landing point. Shaking all over from the tension, he stood in an awkward position, avoiding the sharp spikes. Now, he could breathe a sigh of relief. He had finally managed to land safely. Kiska raised his head, smiling, while the bugbear remained standing above, shouting something at him in his beastly language. Now Kiska could get into the secret room. Staring into the darkness of the tunnel ahead, he tried to clear his mind of unnecessary thoughts. He didn't even want to count how many times he had been stabbed before. The tunnel was not very spacious, so he had to crawl on his knees. After a while, he saw a light at the end, the approaching exit. Kiska's eyes sparkled with amazement. He found himself in an almost empty room. In the middle of the room stood a table with a chest on it. It was a treasure chest, which Kiska hastened to open. Inside, on carved metal, lay a sparkling stone. He assumed it was some kind of crystal. Suddenly, a sign appeared before his eyes, saying that Kiska had acquired the Crystal of Wisdom, and the effect would appear when used. Then a large window appeared with a list of ranks and skills. Kiska was surprised by the large number of available skills, but he received a warning that he could only choose one. So he began to think about which one to choose. His gaze fell on the A rank. Kiska thought that skills, such as healing magic or fire magic, probably weren't very suitable for him. Because first, he would need a skill, such as magic regeneration. That left sword mastery and boost shooting. At that moment, Kiska smiled. It was useless to him as long as he didn't have any weapons. So he thought he should choose something from the S rank. He looked through the list. Kiska decided that he could choose acceleration to run fast, but stealth would be enough for survival. Kiska smiled as he finished his selection and clicked on the desired word. He received a notification that he had acquired the stealth skill. Kiska looked at his hands with admiration when he felt and saw his body enveloped in glowing energy. Suddenly, there was a noise behind him. Turning around, he saw the only exit from the room slam shut. Kiska realized with horror that he was trapped. As if to confirm his words, circles with magical symbols began to appear on the floor of the hall. Large silhouettes appeared above each circle, becoming clearer with each passing moment. Now the MC stood before a large crowd of evil bugbears. The monsters shouted a battle cry in unison in their language, which was incomprehensible to humans. Kiska just stared at them in shock, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed to him that this was some kind of bad joke. But now he was dying again at the hands of the bugbears. 10 bugbears had beaten him to death in that room with the treasure chest. Waking up a moment after his death, Kiska jumped up, almost screaming. Turning around, he saw the bugbear that had killed him the first time. With horror and a certain annoyance, he realized that he would have to go through the same thing again. Leaning against the table with the chest, Kiska tried to catch his breath. Somehow, he had made it back to this place again. The familiar table with the selection list appeared in front of him. Now the MC knew which skill to choose this time. It should work. Kiska used his acceleration skill and rushed into the crowd of bugbears. When one of them swung his fist, he was able to dodge it with ease. Admiring his result, Kiska noted that this skill was quite good. Now he could see the trajectory of each bugbear's movement. After more than 200 deaths, he finally realized that the S-rank stealth skill was useless against 10 monsters. But the acceleration skill should help. Kiska jumped high into the air and punched the beast in the face with all his might. He proudly praised himself for his small achievement. But then he immediately sensed something was wrong. He looked at his hand. His wrist was broken and now dangled like a rag doll. It was an open fracture, and Kiska stared in shock at the piece of flesh peeking out of his limb. In the process, as the monsters were already beating him, he cursed. It turned out that his body was not designed for the acceleration skill. After waking up, Kiska immediately looked at his hand. It was as expected, now whole. Then he turned to the enraged beast and realized that he was back at the starting point of his journey. But with the experience he had gained, he had made great progress. While fighting the monster, Kiska thought about his next move. If he could use his acceleration skill to dodge the bugbear's attack, he would have plenty of opportunities to strike back. So he decided to choose acceleration again and storm the room. Suddenly, he was hit hard on the head. He had missed the attack. After about 225 attempts, the MC finally reached the coveted room. Getting to this place was already quite exhausting. Kiska died 5 times just because he relaxed too much. After choosing the acceleration skill, bugbears predictably appeared behind him. They growled invitingly, and Kiska rushed towards them with the same fighting spirit. He couldn't help but curse at another dangerous moment. He didn't understand why his tactics weren't working. He had already accumulated 300 attempts to dodge. Every time he chose to accelerate, but they continued to kill him. Kiska tried his best. He used his speed, aimed for the eyes, but the monsters endured the pain and continued to attack. He even tried to grab and choke them, but the other bugbears easily killed him. For example, right now, one of them has him firmly in a headlock, while another kills him with a single blow. Kiska is afraid to think about it, but he still assumed that his S-rank skills wouldn't help him defeat even one bugbear. His weak body fell from their hands to the floor, losing consciousness and bleeding out. He cannot defeat them with acceleration. This became clear after 300 attempts. He would have to start all over again. Kiska stood in front of the skill menu and was indignant. He couldn't even muster the courage to choose anything. Every time he dies, a bugbear immediately attacks him, killing him as soon as he hesitates. MC closed his eyes, doubts crept into his head, and he already felt like there was no way out of this place. The image of his lovely girlfriend immediately came to mind. How she smiled sweetly at him and gently called his name. Then, Next to her, his imagination conjures up the image of a smirking Darga. He asks mockingly and defiantly whether Kiska is going to return or not. Opening his eyes, Kiska frowns seriously. He hates this man with all his soul, and this feeling consumes every cell of his body. If it weren't for this hatred, he would have given up long ago. Kiska resolutely chose hand-to-hand combat from the list. He promised himself that he would definitely get out of this dungeon and take revenge with his own hands. Evil bugbears appeared before him, and he resolutely rushed into battle. Now Kiska would use hand-to-hand combat, acquiring skills to strengthen his body and physical fortitude. With each attempt continuing to die, he learned how each skill worked against the bugbears. In this way, he reached about the 420th attempt. MC stood on the monster's shoulders, holding its head with his hands. A mischievous grin played on his face. As he had thought, physical enhancement was quite good. Attack, defense, and jump power. All of these abilities significantly improved his balance. Suddenly, the bugbear beneath him let out a deafening roar, raising its head slightly. But Kiska had everything under control, so when the alien hands began to rise to slap him, he pushed off with his feet. He said goodbye to the monster, calling it Variable C. He crouched down and flipped over in midair. He found another bugbear looking back at him. That was his target. He named it Variable A. He stretched out his leg to strike in midair. The expression on his face bordered on madness. A powerful blow struck the beast's head, and its body fell to the floor. Kiska received a notification that destroying the monster had increased his skill points. He froze for a moment, processing the information. He had defeated a bugbear for the first time. He was very happy about this and made a victory gesture. He ran away from the crowd, buying himself some time, and opened the menu. He could raise his skill level. After applying the option, MC felt a surge of energy, and his physical enhancement increased to level 2. The bugbears surrounded him on all sides, but Kiska didn't panic. He figured that if he defeated the next monster, and thus increased his level, he would be able to reach a state where he could defeat them all. Kiska ran out of the dangerous circle. His expression showed his desire to win. A notification popped up in front of his eyes stating that 100 SP were required to advance to the next level of physical enhancement. Kiska froze. His mouth opened slightly in surprise. If he was given 12 SP for each monster, then to earn 100 SP, he would have to defeat almost all of them. His shoulders slumped, his legs felt like cotton wool, causing his knees to buckle slightly. A shadow of uncertainty fell across his face, and a drop of sweat rolled down his temple. Kiska watched with a confused smile as the bugbear surrounded him, but he couldn't move because what was required of him was impossible. Without improving his skill, there was no way he could defeat them. It was his 510th attempt. He stood leaning against the table, his whole body trembling with fatigue. His patience snapped, and he shouted into the void that he'd had enough. His eyes closed, his eyebrows knitted together, and tears streamed down his cheeks. The MC desperately wondered why this had to happen to him. Then he launched into an angry tirade about how it was all Darga's fault. Because of him, he was stuck in this hell. Kiska cursed him furiously. Through clenched teeth, he hissed that he would get out of this dungeon and kill everyone who had betrayed him. His trembling hands were still resting on the table. He was overcome with pain and moral exhaustion. He had even partly resigned himself to the fact that he would not be able to escape from here. His trembling hand reached for the screen, and only then did the MC look up. A notification about acquiring the provocation skill lit up above him, but Kiska was not impressed. He had accidentally pressed that button. Such a skill was unlikely to be useful to him. Therefore, he would have to die to try something else. Teleports with monsters appeared behind him, as usual, and Kiska slowly turned to face them. Since he had chosen this skill, he had to see how it worked. For a moment, he just stood silently as the bugbears moved toward him. As a test, he called out to them, calling them idiots. One monster reacted and rushed to attack him. The MC only had time to jump aside as the monster flew into the wall at high speed, smashing through it with its head. He turned around in shock and looked at the result. Still surprised, he turned his head toward the other bugbear. He held out his hand and beckoned with 2 fingers, calling it an idiot. The beast reacted instantly, growling aggressively and swinging its paw. But at the right moment, Kiska dodged the attack, and his heavy fist hit the other bugbear in the face. Kiska watched all this in disbelief. He stood with wide eyes and a crooked smile. Then he bowed his head and snorted, chuckling. The room was filled with loud laughter. Kiska covered his forehead with his hand, his eyes still wide open, but his lower eyelids slightly raised, his broken eyebrows giving his face a slightly ironic expression. It was hard for him to accept that all his previous attempts had been in vain. He raised his head and cursed again through his laughter, the situation infuriating him greatly. But then he looked down at the remaining crowd and addressed them, announcing that he would use this skill to crush them all. His fatigue vanished. The monsters surrounded him in a circle, which was exactly what Kiska wanted. He beckoned them over with a gesture and asked defiantly how long they were going to mess with him. The beasts lunged forward, and the MC deftly slipped through a small gap, causing the beasts to strike each other. He continued to provoke them and incite their aggression, deftly causing them to collide with each other. Soon there were many huge bodies lying around him, and Kiska allowed himself to laugh at that moment. Only 2 enemies remained. With maniacal madness on his face, he provoked them into action. The bugbears ran at him while he stood still and waited for the right moment. When they got close, Kiska stepped back sharply, and the enemies simultaneously hit each other in the face. Blood spurted upward, splattering Kiska's hair and face. He stood with a serious expression on his face, clenching his fists tightly. Then those fists rose up and came down with a jerk on his bent elbows. Closing his eyes, Kiska let out a victorious cry, releasing his emotions. On about his 510th attempt, he was able to reclaim this room. Shouting curses and gritting his teeth, he now ran down the corridor with all his might. Behind him, a fiery horse with a severed head chased him, shooting fiery swords. Escaping from a room with 10 bugbears through the newly appeared exit, he found himself on a new level. And now he was standing and hiding around the corner from an incomprehensible creature that was roaming the floor. This headless mule of rank had already killed him about 10 times. But peeking cautiously from around the corner, Kiska smiles nervously. After all, there are some positive aspects. Now, the point of return is in the treasure room. Taking advantage of the moment when the mule turned away, the fugitive made a run for it, remaining unnoticed. The thought that he would no longer have to fight these bugbears was a welcome relief. Soon, Kiska reached a place he had never been before. It was a small room with 3 seals illuminated by torches. Kiska thought it was a teleportation zone, but there were 3 different circles in front of him, which meant he had to choose one of them. At first, he nervously pursed his lips, but then quickly reassured himself that there was nothing to worry about here. He chose the middle circle and stepped onto it. His body was enveloped in a bright glow. If he made a mistake, he could choose another option next time. For a moment, he looked at the flickering lights in front of him, and then he found himself in a new place. A long, dark corridor lit by fire opened up before him. There was nothing left to do but keep going. At the end, he saw something that made his eyes widen. His gaze was fixed on a motionless female figure floating in a vertical cylinder. Soft light outlined her flawless features, emphasizing her long dark hair that framed her pale face. Her eyes were closed, giving her an air of fragility and serenity, contrasting with the shifting chains that wrapped around her body like an imprisoned angel. Kiska recognized her. She was the girl who had given him his skill. Looking more closely at the barrier around her, he reached out a trembling hand. When his finger touched the surface, the cylinder with the chains cracked like glass, scattering in all directions. MC was very surprised that it broke from a simple touch. The girl's body lost its support and fell so unexpectedly that he didn't have time to do anything. He quickly crouched down closer to her and asked anxiously if she was okay. She struggled to her feet and knelt down, looked at Kiska, and after a moment replied in the affirmative. Her eyes showed gratitude for helping her come to. Kiska jumped to his feet and asked her who she was, looking confused. The girl got up, leaning on her knee, and stood in front of him. With her left hand on her hip, she easily introduced herself as Ajiha Tsubaki, a sealed former heroine. Kiska repeated the unfamiliar words in his head, not understanding. But when Ajiha asked his name, he immediately introduced himself. Ajiha liked it very much, as confirmed by her shining eyes and slight blush on her cheeks. She put her finger to her chin thoughtfully. Then she asked him to lean in. Kiska didn't understand at first and asked her to repeat herself, but then he resigned himself and cautiously brought his face closer, looking away. Ajiha gently cupped his chin and covered his lips with hers in a silent kiss. Kiska was taken aback and hastily pulled away from the girl. Hesitating, he asked what she was doing, but she just wanted to thank him and didn't see anything wrong with it. Kiska hesitated again, unable to find an answer. He didn't understand what she wanted from him. Ajiha turned around and asked if he wanted to get out of the dungeon. Kiska regained his serious mood. He definitely wanted to escape from here. After receiving his answer, the girl smiled smugly and grabbed his wrist. She ran, dragging him along, and with a cheerful smile promised to get him out of this place. When they reached the headless mule, Ajiha demonstrated her combat skills. With her sword, she cut it into many pieces. Kiska could only silently admire such instant destruction of an A-rank monster. Ajiha suddenly turned to him and asked with a playful squint how strong she was in his eyes. Kiska beamed with delight and admiration, which made her laugh. She smiled with her eyes closed, and a joyful blush appeared on her cheeks again. MC caught himself thinking that he felt more confident when he was with her. He watched as she reached out her hand toward the chopped-up pieces of the headless mule. A small, glowing stone in her palm attracted one of the pieces of meat. Kiska asked what she had in her hand, and Uchiha turned to him. She opened her palm with the stone so he could see it better and explained that it was a thing that could retrieve and remove various objects. This skill was called storage. Kiska remembered seeing this skill in the status window. Uchiha announced that she had taken a magic stone and urged them to move on. Kiska asked where they were going. She replied that they were going to the room with the mini-boss of the dungeon, since they couldn't move on until they defeated it. Kiska stopped uncertainly, looking at her back. Uchiha said that if he hadn't come, she would have remained sealed there forever. His eyes widened in a silent expression of understanding and perhaps horror. His gaze shifted to her bright smile, which accentuated her delicate features. They reached their destination and stopped in front of a massive door. Uchiha slung her sword over her shoulder, looked at Kiska, and confidently declared that she would fight for him. He was involuntarily embarrassed and covered his mouth with his fist, smiling modestly. He stated that he was alive only thanks to Uchiha, so he was also ready to fight for her in return. The door opened easily, and they looked into the room with a fighting spirit. Before them stood a colossal stone construct. Its massive limbs were composed of stacks of rough blocks, moving in sections of twisted, almost organic stone fabric. A calm human face was carved into one of the blocks, presenting a frightening contrast to the brutal architecture of the body. Stone candelabras topped with ominous tongues of flame stood on either side of this stone anomaly. Suddenly, the S-rank stone giant opened its glowing eyes and mouth. MC was amazed at its size, which was about 10 meters tall. Suddenly, the golem roared and raised its limbs high, attacking the intruders. Pressing her sword to her chest in a combative stance, Uchiha called on Kiska to retreat. With a determined expression on her face, she rushed forward, raising her sword to strike. The loud sound of flying stones and the creature's roar echoed throughout the room. One limb fell to the floor, leaving cracks around it. Uchiha's eyes sparkled with triumph, and a cry of readiness escaped her lips. Kiska's mouth opened in surprise. His companion was indeed very strong. Her sword movements were precise and coordinated. Uchiha was fighting this golem on equal terms. At this rate, she would indeed defeat it. Suddenly, a stone gets caught under her foot. She stumbles with a frightened gasp. The stone giant's limb clenches into a fist and rushes towards Uchiha. She manages to raise her sword in front of her to block the attack. But the blow was too strong, and she was thrown against the wall. Kiska was terrified and shouted her name. Uchiha trembled violently, clutching her head, and tried to recover while the stone fist flew towards her. MC couldn't let the mini-boss kill his companion, so he quickly thought on his feet and used his skill. The huge fist stopped almost at Uchiha's head, and the giant reacted to the provocation. Uchiha cried out in excitement, worried about Kiska. The golem instantly attacked Kiska. His fist slammed into the wall with force, punching through the spot where Kiska's head had been. Uchiha's eyes widened and she froze. She stood with her arms down and stammered, calling out to Kiska. Her body shook, her eyebrows twitched, and her lips trembled nervously. She said she would protect him, but she failed. Suddenly, laughter came from the pile of stones. Kiska, safe and sound, peeked out from under a huge hand. With a victorious grin, he declared that he was very good at dodging, as he had trained a lot on bugbears. Uchiha squealed excitedly, her eyes burning. But Kiska shouted that the golem's arm was stuck in the wall, and she, understanding the hint, accepted the order. The attack begins. She moves forward, radiating confidence and determination. Her eyes burn, and her sword is ready for action. She leaps high toward the enemy while her ally runs away from the wall. She hangs in the air for a second, right above the giant, and raises her weapon above her head. She activates the Holy Path sword technique aloud. The stone monster, frightened by the attack, freezes in anticipation, a silent scream escaping from its face, its eyes wide open in fear. The blade swept across the golem's central axis, leaving a thin line behind. The stone pile, cut in half, collapsed in different directions, and Uchiha landed softly on her feet. Kiska was still trembling slightly, not quite believing what was happening, but he smiled broadly anyway. Uchiha turned around and smiled happily too. Then she raised her arms and, jumping up, ran to Kiska. She threw herself into his arms, knocking him to the floor, and rejoiced that they had succeeded and done it. After defeating the A-rank mini-boss, MC thought that everything would be fine now. Ajiha sat on his lap and hugged him tightly around the neck, blushing. He didn't know yet where all this would lead. Soon they found a passage at the bottom of the wall and began to look for a way out to move on. Ajiha was already halfway through the opening and, calling out to Kiska, informed him that she had found refuge. The tunnel was small, so they had to move on all fours. Kiska crawled behind her and tactfully averted his gaze from her female genitals. Soon they reached the end of the tunnel, and Kiska was surprised by what he saw. He didn't know there were places like this in the underground. They were greeted by a rather cozy room with all the furniture and kitchen utensils. Ajiha said that perhaps vampires had built this room for themselves. Kiska didn't know about their existence and asked if it was true. According to Ajiha, a vampire named Judith considered this underground area her home. Kiska was confused because they had entered without permission and the vampires might be angry with them. But Ajiha asked him not to worry and headed for the bed. Once seated, she admitted that she was tired and suggested staying there for the night. Kiska thinks they shouldn't do that, but he will obey his partner if she is so sure. Tsubaki suddenly called out to him. Her gaze, framed by silky dark hair with an elegant butterfly hairpin, shone with inviting warmth. She beckoned him to come closer. Kiska feigned confusion, not quite understanding what was expected of him. He seemed to want to ask what she meant by that. Ajiha admitted that she wanted to talk to him more than just about food, hinting at her desire for a deeper connection. He suddenly understood the meaning of her words, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He made it clear that he agreed and was ready to give her his time. He sat down modestly next to her on the bed, and for a while, they were both silent. Kiska decided to speak first. He was curious if Ajiha thought he was terrible. Ajiha asked him to explain. He replied that he was referring to his silver hair. But Ajiha thought his hair looked cool, and at first he didn't even believe her. But she turned toward him sympathetically and insisted that it looked simply wonderful and that it was perfect. Kiska accepted the compliment with warmth on his cheeks. Silver hair is a sign of the hated Alps race. His brain began to throw up memories of how people had bullied him his whole life. No one saw his hair as a good thing. In all that time, only two people had reacted normally to it, Namia and Ajiha. She was now smiling at him sweetly and friendly, blushing slightly. And she decided to explain why she thought that way. Perhaps because she was from another world. Kiska was slightly taken aback and asked again. And she confirmed that this was not her native world. Kiska's mouth opened in surprise. This was the first time he had heard of someone coming here from another world. Seeing the doubt on his face, Ajiha narrowed her eyes like a fox and asked defiantly if he didn't believe her. He hesitated for a moment, but then smiled easily and answered honestly that he believed her. She giggled modestly and leaned her head against his shoulder. She rubbed against him contentedly, knowing he would say that. Kiska was touched by her strange closeness, thinking that maybe that was the norm in another world. The silence was broken by a loud rumbling. He covered his stomach with his hand in embarrassment, and then Ajiha sympathetically asked if he was hungry. MC admitted that he hadn't eaten anything since he entered this dungeon, and Ajiha remembered that there was some headless mule meat left in the storage room. Putting her hand on her hip and pressing her fist to her chest, she winked and said she would make them dinner. And so Kiska sat on the sofa, his elbows resting on his knees, glancing at Ajiha. She stood in an apron, deftly wielding a kitchen knife, cutting the meat into neat pieces. When she was done, she poured the hot food into bowls and announced that everything was ready and they could eat. On the table lay a roasted bird, plates of soup, and glasses. Ajiha urged Kiska to try it quickly, and he, wishing everyone bon appetit, put the first spoonful in his mouth. His lips pressed tightly together, and a shadow passed over his face, as if something had dawned on him. Raising his eyebrows slightly, Kiska said it was delicious. Ajiha was very happy that he liked the food. It was difficult to get food in the dungeon, and she didn't know how to cook anything complicated. Kiska looked at Ajiha's rosy cheeks. She had tried the dinner too. Kiska guessed that she had some spices and seasonings in her storage that she had used to make a very tasty dish. This was the first normal meal he had had since he was thrown into this hellish dungeon. He couldn't quite believe it. Ajiha suddenly noticed that he was crying and thought she had added too many spices. Wiping the wet trails from his cheeks, he agreed with her. There was still some food left in the pot, but the guys were already full. MC was tired today and said he would go to bed early. But there was only one bed in the room, so he decided to give it to his partner and sleep on the sofa himself. Ajiha did not stop washing the dishes. She believed that they did not need to sleep separately. Turning to Kiska, she added that they could sleep in the same bed. Kiska was shocked. He disagreed with her and said it wasn't a good idea. Soon, everyone was lying in their own place, and Kiska was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Turning to face the wall, he thought about what would happen if things continued like this. Then, with Ajiha's strength, he would be able to escape from the dungeon. He knows it's pretty pathetic to rely on a girl's strength, but with her, he has a chance. Suddenly, he felt someone sneaking up on him. Ajiha sat at his feet like a predator. Then she quickly moved up, placing her hands on either side of his head, and announced cheerfully that she was with him. Kiska's eyes widened in surprise. He was about to ask what she was doing, but stopped when she leaned over him and covered his lips with hers. Raising herself on her knees, Ajiha took his hand and, melting with impatience, suggested that he quickly touch her breast. Turning his palm over, she pressed it against her right side, telling him to listen to her heartbeat. Leaning directly over Kiska's face, she confessed that she loved him. He was stunned and couldn't understand what was happening. She showered him with declarations of love, as if unable to contain her overwhelming feelings. Her face burned with embarrassment, but her eyes shone with delight. She continued to express her love, and her words became more and more passionate. Unable to withstand the intensity of her feelings, Kiska asked her to stop. He found it hard to believe what was happening and didn't understand what he had done to deserve such attention. Kiska assured her that he had done nothing to make her feel differently about him. She suddenly fell silent, looking at him from under her lowered eyelashes. She was curious why he was reacting this way to her confession and what he was saying at all. After all, Kiska had saved her, and she considered that a compelling argument for her feelings. All that time, she had been sealed in the depths of the dungeon. For 100 years, she had been alone, waiting for a prince to rescue her one day. That's why everyone who came to the depths of the dungeon, she granted them her skill. Kiska suddenly remembered that moment from their first meeting. It turned out that Ajiha had granted him this skill because she wanted him to save her. Ajiha put her hands behind her back, looking away as she continued her story. It was all useless. It seemed like she had given her skill countless times, but all these people gave up halfway through. And Kiska was the only one who had been able to reach her. Kiska's eyes widened even more as she leaned closer to him. Ajiha, with a maniacal obsession in her eyes, called him her prince, whom she had waited for so long. MC just frowned, regretting that things had gone this far. The pause dragged on, and she began to take off her clothes without getting up from him. He froze in fear, his cheeks turning red. He hastily tried to stop her. With a pleading voice and looking away, he begged her to stop, raising a protective barrier with his hands. She stopped, her eyebrows raised questioningly in incomprehension. He lowered his gaze, feeling depressed and confused. He said he couldn't do what she wanted. Ajiha's gaze showed confusion and anxiety. She asked why he couldn't accept her. His reason was simple. He loved someone else. And Ajiha accepted that answer. It seemed to upset her a little, but it certainly didn't stop her. Grabbing him by the shoulders, she pushed him onto his back, assuring him that nothing terrible would happen. She would still be happy, even if she became the second woman. Her burning eyes confirmed that her pressure was on the verge of madness. Kiska pulled him into a passionate kiss. His mind began to throw up memories of his beloved friend and his enemy, reminding him of what he had started fighting for and what he wanted revenge for. The sliding of lips did not stop, and Kiska could not control himself. Nervously jerking, he pushed Ajiha hard in the chest, asking her to stop, which made her squeal in fear. She was thrown to the floor along with the blanket, and Kiska immediately swung his legs off the sofa in alarm. Stammering, he tried to apologize and ask if she was okay. He was sorry, but he couldn't help himself. When she lunged at him, he immediately remembered the guys who had tried to rape his girlfriend. Silently getting up from the floor, Ajiha sighed in disappointment and apologized. She had indeed rushed things a little, so she calmly turned around and headed for her bed. Kiska stared at Ajiha, who had turned away toward the wall for a while. He wondered why her behavior had changed so abruptly and where her passion had gone. Lying on the sofa with his face to the wall, he replayed the scene that had happened earlier in his mind. Kiska regretted pushing her away unintentionally. He should have found a gentler way. It sounded awkward, but without Ajiha's help, there was no way he could get out of the dungeon. MC finally managed to close his eyes and fall asleep. Tomorrow he would have to deal with his feelings. The night passed quickly, and Kiska struggled to lift his heavy eyelids. Frozen on the sofa, he breathed heavily, fighting the remnants of sleep. He turned his head. He saw a silhouette frozen in the corner. Coldness gripped his heart, where he realized it was Ajiha's hang body. He could only ask himself, in a sluggish voice, what was happening here. His voice was filled with disbelief and horror. Choking on the rising despair, he tried to suppress the urge to vomit. He covered his mouth with his hands, fighting the nausea that overwhelmed him. His eyes reflected horror mixed with guilt. With a tremor in his voice, he thought that she must not have been able to bear his rejection. His gaze fell on her lifeless limbs, and a shiver ran through his whole body. In a panic, he clasped his head in his hands, his thoughts racing. Could she really have killed herself because he rejected her? Kiska glanced at the corpse's open mouth, from which viscous contents were flowing out and dripping down her chest. MC no longer understood anything. Unable to bear it, he jumped up from the sofa and ran, convincing himself that he was not to blame for what had happened. He quickly crawled into the tunnel, wanting to leave the shelter as soon as possible. All the way, as if spellbound, he repeated the same thought to himself. It was an accident. Climbing out into the dungeon corridor, he jumped to his feet and rushed away, not noticing that the headless mules were chasing him. They neighed menacingly, attracting Kiska's attention, and aimed their fiery blades at him. One of them caught up with him and rammed Kiska with such force that he fell to the floor. Ajia's power had brought him this far, but now it was gone. Therefore, Kiska easily caught the monster and killed it immediately. Following the usual pattern for this skill, Kiska woke up in the treasure room. He looked at the lifeless bodies of the bugbears. He had returned to this place again. Kiska stood up and pursed his lips. Ajiha had died because of his choice. Leaving the treasure room, Kiska couldn't stop thinking about what he should have done. Should he have accepted Ajiha's love? The lovely Namia and memories of her came to mind again. But, unfortunately, she was no longer there. Ajiha, on the other hand, was alive, and now the MC was standing in front of the magical barrier with chains that held her captive. Since he was back here, Kiska decided that this time he would accept her love. With a single touch, he destroyed the protective barrier, and Ajiha's body fell to the floor. She held her head as she regained consciousness. Kiska looked at her with a slight tension, mentally assuring himself that he was doing the right thing, because this way he would save her. But Ajiha did not look friendly. She looked at him from under her eyelashes and then asked dryly who he was. Kiska smiled warmly and introduced himself, but the unfamiliar expression on her face did not change. She slowly got to her feet and said that she had never heard that name before. Then she moved closer to him, questioning him. Curling her upper lip and looking him straight in the eye, she asked why he smelled so disgusting, which caught Kiska off guard. MC was puzzled as to why she was acting so strangely. This unfriendly girl in front of him didn't seem like Ajiha, even though she looked like her. In an attempt to make sure it was really her, he called her name. Ajiha immediately turned her back to him, tilting her head back and putting her hand to her forehead, as if she had realized something. She realized that this wasn't their first meeting. And MC also realized that if Ajiha had given him the skill save and start over, it was natural to assume that they had met before he went back in time. She assumed that Kiska had behaved hostile toward her last time. He wanted to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but he was immediately grabbed by the throat. So he simply said that he was not her enemy. But Ajiha didn't seem to be listening at all, easily pulling Kiska off the floor. She looked completely insane in her idea and only became more convinced of the reason for the unpleasant smell coming from MC. Kiska held her wrist with both hands, but it didn't help. His throat continued to be squeezed, causing him a cough. Frowning hostile, she gave him a sharp look and warned him to listen to her carefully. He couldn't even hope that death would allow him to correct any mistakes. Even in death, his actions left a mark on her soul. Fighting the tremors, Kiska croaked, asking who she was. And Ajiha grinned predatorily, saying that she was just as evil a creature, so he shouldn't expect small talk. In his request to speak with the real Ajiha, he was refused because he had already rejected her once. The MC looked into those crazy eyes and wondered why this had happened. Finally, Ajiha decided to give him some advice, that he should never contact Ajiha again. In the silence of the hall, there was a crunch. With these words, she broke his neck. Kiska returned to the starting point. He sincerely did not understand the meaning of it. He didn't understand who that girl was, or maybe she just had a split personality. He clenched his teeth, replaying her last words in his head about him not contacting her anymore. Otherwise, she would most likely kill him again. In that case, MC decided not to go back to her and break the seal. Hiding from the headless mule, he realized once again that without Ajiha, it would be much more difficult for him to pass through the dungeon. Therefore, he needed to choose another path. He reached a small hall with 3 teleports. Last time, Kiska chose the center circle, but now he decided to choose the left one. The teleportation was tense. But when the process was over, Kiska found himself in the same corridor as Ajiha. He walked step by step and finally reached the end. Kiska was surprised by what he saw. In the middle of the room, like a vision from another world, sat Judith. Her long platinum hair, gathered into 2 high ponytails, framed her face with closed eyes and a serene smile. She was dressed in an elegant corset dress with a fluffy skirt decorated with ruffles. The room was lit by the soft light of 2 tall candelabra, and her peaceful appearance contrasted with the brutal stonework of the walls. She gracefully raised a cup of tea to her lips. Kiska stared at her with his mouth open, not expecting to meet a girl here. She didn't notice him right away, but when she did, she said that strangers rarely came here. MC couldn't believe that Judith was drinking tea so calmly and leisurely in this hellish dungeon. He was tormented by questions about who she was and what this meant. After a pause, Judith asked him with a friendly smile what he wanted here. Kiska hesitated, rubbing the top of his head awkwardly. Then, after gathering his thoughts, he replied that he was looking for a way out of the dungeon. He looked away, not knowing what else to say, and Judith accepted his answer. She reproached him, noting that his behavior was disrespectful. She calmly placed her cup on the saucer, emphasizing her dissatisfaction. Kiska was overcome with amazement and confusion. Judith slowly moved her left hand to the side, and then she revealed her true nature. She was a real vampire. Her previously innocent appearance now took on a sinister tone. With the sharp nail of her other hand, she drew a sharp line across her wrist, cutting herself. A predatory smile appeared on her pretty face. She said that perhaps he knew her by the name of Judith, hinting that he should know who she was talking about. Dark blood flowed from her wound. A wave of fear ran through Kiska's body, his gaze fixed on the cut on Judith's wrist. A moment later, he was horrified to discover that the chair she had been sitting in was now empty. The vampire herself appeared right in front of his face in a second. The blood from her hand took the form of a large blade, which she kindly pierced his chest with. Kiska was struck by excruciating pain and fell to the floor. Judith's words sounded like a sentence. She said that Kiska could only atone for his guilt with his death. At the last moment, Kiska could only see her laughing madly, reveling in her power. Waking up in the treasure chamber, MC greedily gulped air as if he had been drowning in a river. Once again, he fell into despair at being killed again. But he was able to come to the logical conclusion that everyone in this dungeon had gone mad. Kiska remembered that Ajiha had once talked about a vampire, the one who ultimately killed him. Just the memory of Judith made his body tremble. She was dressed like a sweet girl, but she turned out to be a dangerous creature. MC thinks he won't be able to defeat her. He left the treasure room and successfully avoided the monsters along the way, heading for the room with the teleporters. This time, he will choose the third route. He only had the right teleportation circle left. Without hesitation, Kiska stepped on it and plunged into the bright light. He found himself back in a corridor similar to the previous ones. Stepping forward, Kiska could only hope that no evil creature awaited him. Something interesting awaited him at the end. His surprised gaze fell on a dark blade with patterns. A dark sword with an unusual design stood on a pedestal in front of him. The hilt was decorated with an image of an ominous eye. You could even see teeth and sharp wings. All this time, Kiska had been empty-handed, but if this sword turned out to be an excellent weapon, it could help him escape from the dungeon. So Kiska decided to give it a try and grabbed the hilt. Suddenly, his eyes widened in fear. He screamed at the top of his lungs, like a beast caught in a trap. At that moment, he felt terrible pain throughout his body. He grabbed his arm, but it wouldn't obey him. This agony lasted several minutes. Then, unable to bear it any longer, he lost consciousness. After some time, Kiska found himself lying face down on the pedestal itself. He thought he was going to die, so he was surprised that he was able to wake up at all. With difficulty, he got up, rubbed his chin with his fist, and cursed the sword as if it were to blame for all his sins. Muttering that it hurt a lot, he looked down at his right hand, which was holding the weapon. The sinister blade seemed to have engulfed his limb with its tentacles. Kiska breathed heavily, his pupils shrinking in fear. It seemed as if his right hand had merged with this sword. Moreover, it was very heavy, so much so that his hand trembled from the weight. Holding his elbow and leaning slightly on the blade on the floor, Kiska stood in confusion, frantically trying to figure out what this could mean. He moved toward the exit, dragging the dark steel behind him. Although he could move, it was unclear how he could improve his skills with such a heavy load. Soon he stumbled upon a new monster in the corridor. Right in front of him stood a huge, muscular A-rank werewolf. It bared its animalistic grin with sharp teeth. Dressed in shorts, it seemed ridiculous but intimidating. Kiska could only resign himself to the comical nature of the situation. The fearsome beast let out a heart-rending howl that echoed through the corridor. Kiska even smiled. It was useless. He was about to die. But suddenly his sword broke free from the floor. It seemed to come to life and pulled him forward with unstoppable force. MC flew down the corridor, unable to resist. The sword crashed into the werewolf at tremendous speed and pierced it through, tearing its flesh to pieces. Time seemed to stand still, and then the monster collapsed to the floor, crumbling to dust. Kiska stared in amazement at his weaponized arm, trying to understand what had just happened. The sword began to move on its own, as if it had a will of its own. Kiska tensed at first, but then decided that he was fine with it. He would do anything to get out of this dungeon. even if it meant using this sinister sword. In this way, he easily scattered the werewolves to the right and left. Gradually, he continued to move forward. Kiska recognized that this sword was truly powerful and could be relied upon. Now Kiska felt like a winner who could overcome any obstacle. Soon, he reached a massive door. Kiska stopped in front of it, deciding that behind it lay the mini-boss room. Last time, there was a golem in such a room, so now he wondered who would be there. Opening the heavy doors, he saw a monster inside that was not so huge. A huge S-rank griffin awaited him, a creature with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. Its huge wings spread predatorily, inspiring terror with their mere appearance. The piercing gaze of its dark eyes instilled an inexplicable fear. Its impressive size and powerful claws indicated that it was an extremely dangerous opponent. With a deafening roar, the griffin lunged into attack. Just when death seemed inevitable, Sword suddenly pulled Kiska away from the blow. At that moment, a huge clawed paw crashed down on the spot where he had just been standing, shattering the stone. Kiska landed nimbly. Despite the deep bruises under his eyes, a sly smile remained on his face. After all, now he had a black sword. He stood firmly on his feet, holding his right arm weapon, and waited for the attack with a challenge in his eyes. Griffin lunged at him again with a cry. It pounced on him with a flurry of claw strikes. Kiska held his sword in front of him, parrying each attack. Sparks flew from the clash of metal and claws. It wasn't that difficult for Kiska to hold back the ferocious beast. At times, the sword simply pushed him aside, away from the sharp claws. That was all the MC could do right now, was to simply not interfere with the movements of the sinister sword. Griffin attacks again with a jump, and Kiska lets his arm move on its own and swings his limb upward. For him, this is the only way to win. The dark blade makes a sharp movement and cuts off the bird's head on the fly. The beast falls dead, and Kiska lands gently with a sly expression on his face. The black sword is powerful. It will defeat anyone who stands in its way. As after the killing of the golem, a secret door opened in the room. Kiska headed for the exit, looking sinister with black bruises under his eyes. With this sword, he will return from the dungeon in no time. MC was no longer walking down the corridor, but dragging himself along. He looked exhausted and tired. Sword seemed to be growing larger and larger, like a curse. It had completely engulfed his right hand and was already spreading to his shoulder. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared ahead. Kiska's eyes widened in surprise. Judith was standing in front of him. With a sly smile, she said that he seemed to have grown quite a bit. Kiska stammered her name. He was stunned. Why was she here? Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.